Reverend Fathers and Brothers in Christ, let us begin our morning session. Our first speaker this morning is a very dear friend of mine. He was my boss when I first came here to Calcutta to work in the Department of Theology. He was the one who sent me here, and he was, as part of his work as the director of the Russian project of Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne. He presently serves in two capacities: Dean of International Studies at Concordia Theological Seminary, and he is also the Director of Theological Education in the LCMS Office of International Mission. So you see, even though he has a new job and I have a new job, he's still my boss. Since my assignment is to assist evolving churches in programs of theological education, this puts me under his direction. Dr. Quill was a parish pastor who came to the seminary in the middle of the 1990s. He completed his PhD degree on the theology of Dr. Theodorus Harnack of Dorpat, and is really the authority on Harnack's liturgy and theology. If we start talking about your curriculum vitae, it will take the whole 45 minutes. So I don't think we'll do that. But I'd like, most of you would know him in one capacity or another, Dr. Timothy Quill.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Dr. Evanson. I never did get used to being his boss. And somebody of this like that, I'll always be his student. If I have a doctorate, I'll still always be his student. And I think many of you share that with me, but thank you for the introduction. Are we talking about theological education and international missions in the 21st century? So it really encompasses the whole world. So it's a very big topic. My paper obviously will be too long, but I will just do some snapshots throughout the paper to get some ideas going of what we have to consider, the challenges and things that are faced throughout the whole world, from Europe and America to Africa, Asia, and so forth. I've been in the position of Director of Theological Education for a little over a year. The Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod contracted me half-time to take over that position and expand it. So we expand the position, I go down to half-time. It's sort of odd, but I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And I have an office still at the seminary and also a small cubicle at the church consistory or headquarters. And I share with a few others when I'm there. And I was going through some files of the previous theological education. The secretaries were saying, we have these boxes. What do we do? Should we throw these out? You never want to throw out boxes in a consistory. I know that Dr. Kukunis would concur. You never know what you're going to find in there. Any historian says, don't throw them out. So I said, I'll take them and I'll look through them. And it was interesting because I came across some what our church was doing in the 1990s on theological education. And they had pretty much decided that there's one strategy for the whole world called TEE, Theological Education by Extension. Do you know that word? TEE? Now, it's bad or it's not so bad. It all depends on what you mean by the term. But in this case, I was struck by the fact that you had a bureaucracy that just sort of said, you're all going to do this. You are elected to. Missionaries would do it this way, and it was a top-down sort of command. And my stomach kind of turned over. I thought, oh, I'm in charge. Do we have a strategy for the world? I don't know, and I'm in charge. So I went to the interim executive director kind of sheepishly, and I go, I just found this in these files. And do we have a strategy for the whole world? He kind of looks panicky. No, he says. I go, good, because I don't know what it is. You know, that might seem like we don't know what we're doing. I think we do. I mean, theological education has been around for so long. Seminaries have been around for so long. We just all kind of know what it is, because we've been doing it that way. We've been trained that way. And yet a lot of changes have taken place in the last quarter of a century and continue to take place, which we'll want to take a look at. Which then brought up another question. I was once asked by a woman who was a staff member who was sitting in on a meeting with theological directors when I was discussing theological education. And she asked this really stupid question. What is theological education? And I wanted to say, that's a stupid question. Be quiet. Well, we all know what theological education is, so why are you asking? Well, theological education takes place at a seminary, right? I guess in teachers' colleges and in catechism. And then mothers go home and put their babies on their children on their lap, and they teach them about Jesus. That's sort of echoing of theology. Where does it start and where does it stop? Do you want to have laity that are not informed by good theology? What goes on in Sunday schools and confirmation classes? So that question that lady asked kind of caught me by surprise. It's amazing you get a doctorate, get a position, and then somebody can ask the simplest question, and it makes you feel rather, why did they give me this position? So I went and looked up in the Dictionary of Mission. This is a book, it's a one-volume, the Dictionary of Mission. And I found that they had a definition. And what's nice about this is it's defined in terms of what traditionally it was, but then what has taken place in theological education around the world in the last few decades. I'll summarize, if I can stay. Can you hear me all right if I'm up here? Well, maybe I can do it this way. The term theological education is understood here as an education for the church service. Then it lists various parts of the country. As a rule, theological education takes place under church auspices, in theological colleges, seminaries, Bible schools, and so on. In the past colonial period, in many places, theological faculties or departments of religious studies have been created in which the Roman Catholic Church and Protestant theology is taught, along with non-Christian religions. Well, there's a lot in there, but in short, it summarizes what we kind of just know. Theological education, when we use the term, we're first of all talking about what goes on in the seminary, or in some places in Europe, in a theology department of a university. And then along with whatever practicums they have. Now, this seems obvious, but that has to be defined. Then the next thing is founding phase and building up. Now, that's referring to mission work around the world. In the founding and expansion phases of educational institutions, the most important task of theological education was understood mainly as the training of indigenous pastors and theologians to prepare them to replace the large number of foreign missionary workers in the higher offices of mission churches. Now, what I do in places like Central Europe or here is not the same as it's a totally different approach as when I go to Africa. But looking in the work of theological education around the world in the last 50 years or so, when missionaries 50 years, 75 years ago first went into many of these places, there was no Christianity at all. They just walked into the jungle, and if they didn't get eaten, if they did, then you'd send somebody else. And then they die of malaria. You'd send somebody else until everybody in Hollow was dead. Then you'd find somebody else. You'd learn the language. You would tell them about Jesus in simple ways, finally baptized, and then you would continue on with the further instruction, didaskalia, catechism. But finally you get to the point with, well, the missionaries aren't going to stay there forever. So you finally got written materials, the Bible, dogmatic texts. How are you going to train pastors in these places? Pretty complex. The missionaries thought this through. They'd start schools alongside churches and along with humanitarian work, hospitals, the economy. But the schools not only helped to raise the level of the people, and especially when they couldn't read, but also helped the seminaries in the church. They translate the Bibles. In many cases, the Africans or the Papua New Guineans would have to learn English or German or Spanish, depending on the missions. If they were going to go to the seminary, they couldn't study it oftentimes in their own language, Zulu or Pidgin English in Papua New Guinea, for a couple of reasons. One, they had no corpus of theological works translated. Where's the textbooks? In some cases, it was because the languages were quite primitive, and it was just very difficult to translate some very, abstract theology into these languages. So what eventually happened was both. You would kind of do both things at the same time. So according to the Dictionary of Mission, they talk about the goal that goes on, and it takes time. It doesn't happen in 5-10 years. It's not a fast food restaurant here. You don't cook up pastors as fast as a Big Mac or a Burger King. It takes time until you not only have raised up pastors there, but also their own professors. The picture I showed you at the beginning was the faculty in Nigeria as it is today. Later I'll show you a picture as it was a few years before. There's reference here to residential seminaries. That's the model that was used. The European missionaries, North American missionaries just sort of copied the way they do it. You go to a place, you live in a dorm, you study with a group of fellow seminarians, and you get mentored. You learn how to be a pastor by living in a community of study with other young men who will be with you, Lord willing, for the rest of your life, and you're shaped by your professors, you're shaped by daily worship. It's sort of a package deal. And you learn the languages, and it takes time. Cook up a nice stew. It takes time to simmer to make a pastor. It also takes a lot of money. Well, this article is only 4 pages, and then it goes into how, in recent years, the explosion of converts in many countries happened so well. All of a sudden, your churches reached a point where all of a sudden they had so many converts, they didn't have enough pastors. The unbelievable amount of people versus pastors, and they could not produce and train pastors right and well fast enough. And so churches would continue to grow. Who's going to care for the churches? Well, so they would start evangelists or deacons. And they were trained at a different school. Sometimes those would be stepping stones up. And that still was not enough. So in places like Kenya, they would start mission training centers because there were little churches where even the deacons could not get there. The pastors, what little salary they get, it all goes into supporting their family and the gasoline, or if they have a bike. So what happens if no pastor or deacon can get to a congregation for a month or two? Well, you have somebody in the congregation lead the service, a man, a layman. Well, what if this layman was rather charismatic in the sense, really builds this church up, and people like it, they come. Well, that's good, but what if he has no theological training? Churches can get split very quickly. New sects can spin off, and the church can have, and does have, all kinds of problems. So it has to answer this by training these pastors the best they can. So they started things called mission training centers. And granted, it's a very limited amount, low level. I was talking to Bishop Obari about 6 months ago, and I said, I heard that you have one of the leaders at the mission training at a congregation who can't read. Come on, can't read? He can't even read the Bible? What did he say? Would you read the Bible this morning? I can't read. He did say, well, that person is no longer leading the congregation, when he found out about it. So oftentimes the level is low, but you can either ignore it and not train them, or you can give them some training. It's not it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that you have to do something. But the goal is ultimately to have well-trained pastors in every congregation or diocese. That's the goal, but getting there is often not easy. And then sometimes there are other reasons for changing the way theology is done. There's movements where everyone a priest, everyone a missionary, everyone a minister thing, this Oscar Voigt nonsense, where everyone is a minister. We've got to get everyone involved some way. That comes. The Roman Catholic Church has their form of this. It's a little bit different. The Protestants do it. It's infected Missouri. And all around the world, there's sort of indigenous movements for having the people, the theology coming up from the people. Now, well, that's great. You want your theology from somebody that hasn't studied theology? Do you want to go to a doctor who hasn't studied medicine? Yeah. If you do, come to me. I can take care of you. I'll give you a little voodoo and I'll send you a bill. That was a joke, but that one, Bob. So going back to the traditional way, I'll move away from this. I'm running out of time. The traditional idea then was campuses, residential seminaries would be built. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod had about 4 or 5 key legacy missions, but as you know, the Europeans. I even was surprised that yesterday with Dr. Feldmanis, I'd heard this before, that he had been a missionary. And I went online, I'm over there working. I wasn't preparing this. I was actually taking notes on the presentations, and I went online, and I saw this picture of him in a white cassock or long robe, walking somewhere. Where? India? India. It's India. It looked like India. So this isn't just a Missouri Synod. This is the Baltics, the Germans, the Scandinavians, many missionaries. This is Nagercoil, it's part of the seminary. There's many buildings there. This is Jonathan Ekong Memorial Lutheran Seminary in Obadida, Nigeria. I lived on that campus when I was in high school. Papua New Guinea, these are just examples of residential seminaries. This is the seminary in Ghana. They're currently building a new building. Nice building in Brazil, Sao Leopoldo, Seminario Concordia. Matango, that was begun by Scandinavian. The Finnish also had a very important role in that seminary, which now is accredited. They've changed their name to Grace University, Nema, and they're accredited. What's happened is, as time goes by, some of the seminaries develop. And as the people then are educated, they get accredited. It becomes a very important step. And so this seminary now is able to give bachelor's degrees, which then positions the brightest and best of their students to come to Europe or to America and get advanced degrees, and then return home and be professors. Pretoria, South Africa. That was the Blackmar mission from Germany, played an important role in building that seminary. Oh, I just had to show that picture.
Oh, I know that.
You know that? That's not me. This one's me. Can't believe I was a young once. And, I'm ahead of myself. My PowerPoint program isn't very sophisticated, so before I get to that, in recent years, my church body has been experimenting with some new methods of pastoral training. It's kind of controversial. Well, it's very controversial. At one time, there were about 20 different routes towards ordination that had been developed by the different districts. And then finally they started coming in on a thing called delta, distance education. Then they had, now the latest thing is called SMP, specific ministry pastors. And that has also some controversy behind it. Then we had the TEE model and so forth. These models, different ones, are also used throughout the world. I've already referred to them. And some argue you cannot have a residential seminary anymore. It's too costly, and besides, you're just importing a Western model and putting it on these people. They need to have a theology coming up from within. It's more indigenous. I could talk about that for an hour. And it's true. I mean, each area has its own impact on the way it defines its theology and practices its theology. But this is the Church Catholic. We're not a sect. If you want to be a sect, fine. When Africans sometimes say, we need an African theology, I'll hear that when I go over to Africa, or an African liturgy. I say, well, you want an African theology? Africa's a big place. You mean like an Ethiopian theology, or a Bantu theology, or a South African theology? Well, yeah, I guess so. So you all want your little country theology. Well, if you want a theology, maybe you ought to begin with the Bible, the biblical theology, because we all become Jews. Israelites. That's our history. And then maybe, why don't you look at some of the early Africans, like Augustine and others, who was in North Africa and Egypt. Just forgot his name. But look at the what? Alexander and Alexander. Athanasius. I tell the Africans, these are your guys. So let's move from the biblical world to the early church. Incorporate all. Oh, by the way, we're Lutheran, so we want to include the Lutheran fathers. And then, when you have your African theology, it'll be Catholic. You can add what needs to be added. It's kind of a scary thing. But I'm not saying add done. One reason for changing from residential to these other forms around the world, but there's a lot of reasons that I've heard, and I've indicated, I'm going to mention them. One, the high cost of maintaining traditional residential seminaries in this day of shrinking financial resources. Well, it's true, it's costly. You know, at Luther Academy, the stress always of finances. Our seminaries have gone through some real stress in the last 5 years. It's that way all over. Another reason some are saying we don't need residential seminaries is the notion that the curricula from Euro-American culture should not be imposed from above, but grow out of the needs of the local context. That's what they're saying. Another is the claim that educated African pastors, for example, or South American, or Guinean, do not want to go to isolated places and are not welcome in that part of the community. If you take somebody out of the bush, out of the jungle, and in Ghana, educate them, take them to America, they won't want to go back. They'll expect a high salary, and the community won't accept it. That's the argument. And like all of these arguments, there's some truth in it. But it's not all true. I hear from missionaries that say, well, that's kind of insulting. You think that Africans don't want to sacrifice to spread the gospel? But there is always some truth in each of these. And he indicated places where they do sacrifice. The founder, Jonathan Ekong, who came to America from Nigeria, he came as a 40-year-old man or something. And they didn't recognize all of his secondary schools. So he had, as an old man, finished secondary school, then go to college, then go to the seminary. 10 years later, he goes back into the jungle. Today, the seminary there is named after him, Jonathan Ekong. He's sort of the founding father of that church. So there are some that will. Another reason for saying we have to change the model of education is the cultural expectations that highly educated clergy expect higher salaries. Number 5, the claim that those who go off for higher education are not able to relate to their people when they return. These all can be discussed. The claim that seminary education diminishes the evangelical zeal of the graduates and hinders the rapid growth of the church and fosters a maintenance mentality of the church. And finally, the promotion of everyone a minister movement. I'm not arguing for these. I'm just saying that these are arguments that you hear by people who say we should not have residential education. And they need to be seriously addressed and dealt with. I believe residential education is important. I think the formation of pastors takes place in the community. But the community should not be separated from the church. One of the problems with theological education at a state university is that it can be disconnected from the life of the church. Yes, first of all, you have to have a chapel in which daily you're praying all the stuff that's put up here. So this is just academics, but it's doxology. And it's shaped in prayer and song. But second, the education somehow has to be connected to the congregations with field work and internships and that type of thing. I have a hard time preaching I'm a young man in my seminaries. How do you teach? I think we do a pretty good job at our seminary of teaching the languages and doctrine, teaching worship, teaching pretty much every preaching. But the most difficult thing we have is teaching them how to teach. And when we have assessments and it comes back, it's always, could you teach from the congregations? Our pastor doesn't know how to teach. Well, if they'd all copy the best professors like Dr. Scare and some of the crazy professors, they'd be entertaining and everybody would like them. But on the other hand, you do not want your pastors teaching like a professor. And when we've discussed this in the faculty practical department, I just say, we can't do it in a classroom. The only way to teach our pastors how to go out and really teach, well, not only way, but the way that they need to learn is put them in a Lutheran school, let them sit down and watch some of our Lutheran teachers, men and women. Watch how they're teaching these 5th graders and these 7th graders. And when you watch, they're skilled in it. And when you watch, it's sort of like the light switch goes on and you get addicted. Not to liquor or drugs, you get addicted to teaching children. It's just, you can't get enough. But it's a mystery how. And it happens, it's like a disease when you're around sick people. You've got to be in the classroom and be around some of these good teachers. And then it happens. Okay. I'll skip all of this. Okay, we'll do this. There's a picture of when I was in Africa, and this picture I had at the beginning of the seminary, as it looks today, this was the faculty in about 1963 when we lived over there. That was my father. I believe he was leaving to go home, and then they made my father the president of the seminary, and my father said, I'll take it, but only if I'm co-president. It's time to have an African be co-president and move them into this position. And my dad said also, if we start teaching Greek, oh, Africans can't learn Greek. He goes, Americans can't learn Greek, but Africans, they can learn Greek. Because they already know English and Efik and Igbo, and most of them know 2 or 3 languages anyway, so they started doing that. When I lived there, this was still a rainforest. Now that's Ghana, but that's the way Nigeria looked at the time. And a couple years ago, I was in Ghana, and I was able to visit a rainforest. And it was wonderful because it hadn't been destroyed yet. And this, growing up in that, there's a map of the rainforest that used to be, it used to cover all of this, and then it's diminished. Where's Ghana? Here's Ghana. So I was right in here, but as a child, I was in there. And about the same time, I read an article nurturing the Lutheran Church in Liberia's theological ecosystem in the Logia magazine. It was only 1 page. And when I saw the word ecosystem, I thought, oh, I don't want to read eco-theology. I'm not interested in green theology. So first time I didn't read it, but then I went back and read it, and it was a totally different idea. It talks about the author went to Liberia, and Lutherans have been doing mission work there, and he was driving all the way up into the Bong County up here. So he had a long drive through the bush, as they call it, and he said they were going to the Gabanga School of Theology that had been way up north and had been one of those residential seminaries. And he said they had to close it during some civil war, and now they want to get it open, some story. But the important thing is the Africans were explaining to him how theological education in Liberia is like a rainforest. All the analogies only could be pushed so far, but I like this one because it sort of puts together both where the office of the ministry is and where the laity are, the priest. It matches them together. So here's how, I'm quoting, here's how they explain it. I remember these big trees. This isn't even the biggest. There were trees that were so far around the base. I mean, they were like huge white trees, and they would keep bringing them out. The loggers would bring them out. And it always made me kind of sad. I'm not one of these ecological people, but it makes me very sad to see what they did to the jungle that I grew up in. So they're still taking them out. And, but they described how, to the casual observer, the huge trees with canopies hundreds of feet in the air are the most prominent feature of the landscape. The most prominent feature of the landscape. The giants are majestic but statuesque. From the ground, not much seems to be going on up there. So everyone's eye tracks downward to the lower level trees that provide nourishment, like bananas, and shelter like palms to those who live in the bush. From the road, the third level of the forest, grasses, vines, and ivy seem to flow like a river of green from those trees. Then we stopped and got out of the car. As my friend led me into the forest, he helped me see that what I would have missed from our comfortable four-wheeler. The rainforest floor was busy with life. Most of the creatures live on the ground. And the insects and microbes and bacteria that make the earth so fertile live in the ground. It's easy to miss all this action, but it is vital to the health of the whole. It is, after all, an ecosystem. The librarian then explained to me their analogy. In the Lutheran education, theological education, it's like a big tree, which is the seminary, the most prominent feature in the theological landscape. The next level is the clergy with their theological degrees and ordination, who protect and nourish the life of Lutheranism in Liberia. As this group, these pastors are intensely committed to theological growth, which includes week-long continuing education courses. A third level of theological education involves the diaconate, or the lay evangelists, who work under the oversight of ordained ministers. The fourth level takes place in homes, in schools, in congregations, study groups, along with worship. Directly touches most of the lives of Liberian Lutheranism. An ecosystem. All levels of life are vital to the whole. What is true, I think, of Liberia is true of Ghana and Kenya and China and America, the world over. The seminary is the heart and center of a healthy church because it produces the pastors who bring the medicine, who keeps it healthy, the word and sacraments, and who conduct the liturgy. But it's not only about pastors, but about how all live together in a healthy, growing, interconnected ecosystem. Now, I know I still have some time. There's a whole list of challenges that I have. I won't have time for all of them. Issues, challenges, and opportunities in theological education and international mission. This just keeps growing the more I learn and the more I travel. But I think this is still true. Well-educated missionaries and indigenous clergy are necessary to build up their churches and protect them from theological and cultural threats. I'll skip a section. What do we have here? I have a whole section on Lutheran churches and Lutheran missions use the Lutheran liturgy. And again, I think this would be another topic. Sometimes this is the topic I like to talk about. But in short, Lutheran missions should lead the Lutheran churches, and Lutheran churches need Lutheran liturgy. Otherwise, they won't stay Lutheran. The catechism and the liturgy make people Lutheran and then keep them Lutheran. Especially in the mission field, somebody comes to you and they've been pagan or they've been Muslim, and they say, I want to be Lutheran. How do I pray? Oh, I just pray like you used to pray. We'll just put Jesus in there, change it a few words, and then they'll say, well, I can still use these drums. Sure. Well, the drums actually carry a pagan message, and Africans know that. So, but on the other hand, there are ways of playing a drum that do not carry ancient pagan messages, and the Africans have to tell us, is this good or is this bad? I just have a picture up here. Oh, that's a picture from Novosibirsk where they use the liturgy. And look at this interesting one over here. This was at the 75th anniversary of the Church of Nigeria, and I was asked to go there and speak. And it's amazing because when the missionaries first got there, they just put everybody in a black cassock napkin, or just the cassock even. By then it was just black, not cassock, robe. Talar. And then sometimes a stole, maybe. But now that the Africans are, running their own church, I was surprised to find out that, no, they like vestments. They've always liked vestments. Why did the missionaries treat them like a bunch of dour Norwegians? I'm Norwegian, okay, so I can say that. Okay. And I like the bishop in in Kenya, and there they actually have the mitres like the Baltic bishops have. Now there's some serious problems with influence of Pentecostalism into this. So you have a church that looks very high church, and then it has some Pentecostalism that's, I can show you some video, but I won't at this time. But probably a couple of the biggest problems or threats in Africa is Pentecostalism. And there's also threats. I thought that was an interesting sign. Here is prophetic prayer conference. They're all over, everywhere you go. The latest Pentecostal, health and wealth. But then right next to it was some malaria medicine. Well, if this really worked, you probably wouldn't need the medicine. But maybe do both, just to be safe. And this is Ghana, a cross. Very typical. Alive Chapel International. They love the word international. I haven't quite figured it out. I think it's their way of saying we're not a sect, we're Catholic. Or, I don't know. Or, come to our church, we're international. Bring your money to our church because we got connections with the West. I think that's part of it too. And this guy, it's typical, you go around the building and in the front, Alive Chapel has these Americans. I mean, what are they saying? You want to make some connections? You want to get to America? You want some money? Look, we're international, and we got like white faces on the front. And I drove by this every day to teach homiletics. And I asked the students about this. I said, when you get out and have your church, and you are a great preacher, are you going to put up a sign to advertise your church? What would you put on the sign? I would put myself. And then they realized I was joking. What should you put on the sign? Jesus. But it's about him. But those are, that's another Pentecostal church. I have nothing here. It's kind of ironic that I have a slide on liberalism and secularism and there's nothing there. It's just that I'm skipping that section because you all know very much, you don't need me to lecture on that. Except to say that I think some of you know when this Western secularism is being imported into Africa and into South America and some places, it's being rejected. But this game is not over, the war is not over. But as of right now, and the key things are the homosexuals and the women's ordination. But I think those who promote those have an evolutionary view, will wear the Africans down. They're a little slower. They're not as evolved as us Europeans. We'll get to these simple people, right? Give us about 25 years. Did everybody understand my English? There was, I was not describing my view. Are we clear? Yeah. Other people. No. I'm in trouble. Another problem, of course, that you're aware of is Islam. I know Bishop Obari is more concerned about Islam than he is Pentecostalism. And Pentecostalism is a big threat. And so that will affect the curriculum. We don't study Islam at Fort Wayne. We had some courses in missiology and stuff, but our average student doesn't spend a lot of time. But if your seminary is located in Togo, or let's say in northern Nigeria, and you've got constant threats of Islam, how will that affect your curriculum? I should say that I was just in Kyrgyzstan, and before that in Kazakhstan. And as of Saturday, when I left Kyrgyzstan, some of you know Gennady Konin, Big Dr. Gennady. Everybody knows Gennady. Yes. And he's been at a couple of the Clyde conferences, and he Skyped me when he got back to Almaty, and he was elected or placed as the director of the president of the Kazakhstan Bible Society. And when he got back, he said he found out that their offices were raided by the police because they found some book from a previous president on converting Muslims. And the book the title was something like The Secrets of the Burqa. You know, why really do they have this? It's not good. And that's evidently one of the books. So and it's illegal to have that kind of, well, however it's going to be enforced. Each local place decides. The police are the judges. And I have not heard from Gennady since then. So it might just be fine, it'll all blow over. But as you know, you never know. He told me that because of the new law there, that when Otto Brillinger, you know Otto, who goes there regularly with another Roman Miley, they serve the German congregation. He says when you come, you can't wear a clerical and you can't preach because if you don't have a license. We had a Missouri Synod pastor in Kyrgyzstan who, because he assisted with communion or something, I don't think he consecrated, he was a vicar. Some KJV guy came in some Sunday and they kicked him out of the country because he wasn't licensed to do that. So he moved to Kazakhstan, they got the word, he was kicked out of there. When we left the church in downtown Bishkek, the minute we walked out the fence, we took off our clerical. Not because we were ashamed, but they just advised to do that. So, close to home, there's concerns about Islam. Our curriculum has to deal in missions with the relapse into paganism. After generations of becoming Christian, now some are falling back into paganism in countries, as well as in Europe. Denmark. Where's that place in Denmark? Hans Christian Andersen's home? Some place is one of the biggest centers for pagan Norwegian god Thor worship or something. So, and of course, I would have to say that recent released little Gnostic text on Jesus' wife, you see that, the latest, it's only that big, but a couple of women theologians claim Jesus was married. Well, I guess that fits if you're going to want that if you're a Gnostic. And but I think even some of this feminist theology is pagan or Gnostic early. Now, pastoral formation. Just won't have time to do that. I'm just about running out of time here. I don't really know how to get into this. I do have a nice quote from Wilhelm Seeler, who was seminary president at Fort Wayne in 1950, and they dedicated a new dormitory. So he gave a speech at the dedication, which is kind of nice, on the preparation to be a minister of Christ. He goes, "What are the necessary requirements for an upright minister of the Holy Church?" Sider first notes that he must hold to the saving doctrine of the Orthodox Church, that the Orthodox Church has believed, confessed, and taught from the beginning. He adds, he must not merely have a sound and well-grounded knowledge of the salvific doctrine. As God grants, he shall have experienced it himself. Unless the inexperienced minister himself begins to live and move personally in the important doctrine of justification, He is merely a doctrine machine, a Lara machine. He is a lifeless, clanging cymbal and a ringing bell. He is like a wooden figure that is pointing in the right direction, but we cannot go that way himself. Thus the faith of the church proceeds from the mouth, his mouth. Thus the faith of the church proceeds from his mouth, but his heart is far from it. What is the right preparation in order to become a capable minister of the Holy Church? He explains the goal is not to obtain a mere knowledge of all kinds of individual facts, but rather, as God grants, to obtain ever more deeply a comprehensive knowledge of the divine truth. Through the challenges of their studies, they come to a living understanding of the divine truth. According to Seeler, reading and study, I like this, should produce a joyous earnestness in the seminarian, a joyous earnestness that is manifest especially with others and in public. On the other hand, they must avoid the evil danger of caring about a forced spiritual countenance for show, like the Pietists and the Methodists. On the other hand, however, it is certainly an evil condition when joyousness is not supported by a deeper seriousness, such that there results in a silly comicality, a cockiness of the flesh, a worldly disposition of all kinds of loose and unspiritual talk. There's somebody who wants to find the balance. You've got those that are walking around so pious. Then you've got those that are just proving that they're not pietists, so they're a little antinomian. And then there are those that are just the right kind of, not too hot, not too cold, just right. But I like this seriousness. We're not comedians as pastors. Now, I think we can be a little more funny here, but in church on Sunday, we don't dance around like a clown. Then, but we're serious here too. Maybe Gemütlichkeit last night, we were a little more comical. But there's a time and a place, everything in moderation. But his line, joyous earnestness, that's a gift from God, I think. Because the talk, when I have a section on this Oratio Tentatio that you talked about, Dr. Evanson, and you know, pastors that have been around know how you can get beaten down. And sometimes that joy can just get squeezed right out of you. And if they keep pounding it on, it's just gone. And when you have a friend or a colleague, fellow pastor, you see that happen to them, sometimes they become isolated. They're by themselves. And that's why it was great. Where's the bishop? I was taking notes of the visitation. Yes. I was taking notes because that's what bishops do. They visit. And not just to find fault. Your doctrine, why are you doing this? Yes, but to encourage and to comfort. How do we, and I have to close it, at the seminary accomplish all of these things? And I mean, I've got more, a lot more. In a classroom setting. We can do some, you know that. But ultimately, it's just the beginning, and it's learned in the parish, where you have Anfechtungen, but you are together. And a real theologian is made under stress. Because finally, you got to hear the gospel. Isn't it something when you proclaim the gospel to somebody who's been crushed? You just say, you don't have to do more. God just puts his arms around you. It's okay. And to instill that in seminarian, I don't. That's the challenge. Okay, I think we got time for a couple questions. Questions?
While I was studying in Fort Wayne, we had a really good. I had a really good friend, Ebenezer Wafo, from Ghana, Accra, Ebenezer Guapo, yeah. And you know, we got quite close, and we talked about, of course, Latvia and Ghana and so. And one thing that he frankly said that somehow he feels that this Western kind of worshiping is sort of boring to him, and something like that. And
You mean the liturgy?
Yeah, liturgy, that's what I meant. And what is your experience when you are in Africa? Is it so, like, for the majority of Africans that they feel it's more exciting with drums and guitars and that kind of... What's your feeling?
I'll try to keep it short. On the ones, yeah, a lot of them want that. And it's much more exciting to dance around and make a lot of noise. And I mean dance. I mean, they come up during the offering, and they just keep going around. And then sometimes some of them get a little carried. They become showy. Well, look at me dance. And they know when they're not just giving glory to God, but when it's becoming about me. And I don't ever have to talk against drums. I just say, what do you think of drums? And then they start arguing. And let them, I tell them, it's not my job here to fix your church. It's your job to mess up your church, and then your job to fix up your church. It's my job to mess up the Missouri Synod and then fix it up. I'm not here to, but then they just, Bishop Obari said that they never had their own hymn book. So in Kenya, the Lutherans were worshiping, some Norwegians, I'm sorry, and I'm Norwegians, but they didn't even put altars in the church. And they had, one of the first missionaries there was a layman who did communion, and the other was a layman who didn't do communion. So you have them. So they had some worshiping with drums and like Pentecostals. They had some singing Anglican hymns. Another church, they had the Swahili liturgy from Tanzania. Another one, an English one from America. And he said, you go into a Kenyan Lutheran church, you never know. What is this? You go into a Roman Catholic church, that's Roman Catholic. You go into an Anglican, that's Anglican. You go into a Pentecostal, that's Pentecostal. How are we going to be united? And within a few days from now, the first Swahili Kenyan hymn book will be published off the press in Michigan. And they'll be dedicating it hopefully this year. And he said, if we've got to have this to unite the church and keep a Lutheran identity. But your question, I have to leave it for another time. There's just too many.
Yeah, can you explain maybe more deeply what dangers stem from Pentecostalism to missions? Maybe also here in Europe.
Oh, there's so many dangers. But first of all, it's a denial of, they deny the gospel. They deny the means of grace. They turn us from the certainty of word and sacrament, and they point us into here to find certainty and to find God. There are all those things which they do, and much of their music is centered more on mystical, ecstatic, direct encounters with God, which takes you away from where God has placed His certainty in the incarnate Christ in bread and wine. Now, what was the question again? How is the danger?
Well, European manifestations, isn't this also relevant here?
I think, yeah, I think you can answer that better than I can. And in Africa, a big problem is health and wealth theology. And they have these evangelists, Pentecostals, that, are these people dumb? You give money to this guy who drives around in a big car, has an airplane, and you're still poor. How many generations does it take for people to realize that this Pentecostal health and wealth stuff is a scam? Maybe they deserve.
Well, in America, we have that, but even among people who are non-Christians, you have that. Why would you buy a lottery ticket? I mean, we think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just another form of a lottery. Okay, you hope that maybe one day you can be a winner like him.
Some of the, like Willow Creek. You know Willow Creek?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
It's very prominent in Latvia.
Yeah. I've been there. I've been to the Willow Creek itself. And, he originally was with Billy Graham, Heibels.
Yeah.
And he started Willow Creek, and he originally worked with youth work with Billy Graham. And then he evolved, the whole youth work way of being evolved, and then he started a church aimed at young men. That was Willow Creek. He you target audience. You figure out, and he went after young men in that area. Then one of his key workers with youth was a guy named Rob Bell. And then he decided, he's part of what's called the emerging church. Have you heard of the emerging church? This is not quite Pentecostal. It's more like the revivalist tradition. They're kind of parallel. The Billy Graham, the Billy Sunday. And so Rob Bell goes to another city, Grand Rapids, near New York, starts the big church. But now the next generation, believe it or not, they're not, what they are rejecting is the megachurch. Because the megachurch has a stage, a band, it's a production. Pastor Heibels is really cool. He's a great communicator. You listen. I listen to him. I listened to him the whole sermon. My mind never wandered. I don't remember what he said. But he communicates. And everything was done with precision. It was entertainment. So there's another next generation of emerging churches, and they say, well, we got to rediscover this. So some of them, and they're varied. Some borrow candles, some borrow liturgical things, and mix and blend them with contemporary ideas. Some have moved, and it's very postmodern. We got to be whatever I want it to be, and you draw people in the postmodern. And so some of them actually have moved away from the doctrines of the church. Bell has that.
Yeah.
And then, I'm going to finish this. So Bell started this church to describe it. The stage is in the middle, no altar. And then the rock band, they stand around, like some here, some over here, and then some over here. So they're facing each other, like, you know how rock bands jam together? And then the people are behind. So on the good side, at least they're like the traditional choirs. They're part of the people, not up there entertaining. Oh, Jesus, look at my face. You know, you've got to, and if you can make people feel closer. So at least they've rejected that, but it pretends to be more authentic. But it too is very carefully crafted. And now he's burned out. He's moved from the church on to making movies and to bigger things. So they just keep, the new fads keep coming. Okay, I think Sandra.
Yeah, you are talking about Willow Creek. You really don't need Willow Creek. PLI is enough. I know that Lithuanian church rejected PLI, but in Latvian church it's very welcomed, very open, and it's definitely defined as Missouri Synod. That's what Missouri thinks, and that's what Missouri Synod done. And I don't think the methods or the theology behind it is very different from Willow Creek. It's not.
Yeah. Now PLI, of course, like anything, has some good things. They'll teach you how. Sometimes confessional pastors are just all grumpy. We just sit around and grump hard. The one thing about the PLI is when they get together, they kind of have a good time, like you did last night, right? Enjoy each other. And I think they do well at that. There's no reason why we can't have some joyous earnestness. I think they teach some things about organization, that might be right. But the danger is when you move into the doctrine of the church, means of grace, worship. I think that's when there's some, well, in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we do have conflict over PLI. Probably the same concerns that you have here. So be very careful. Though I did go to one major PLI conference, and these are not evil people. No, these, and I did learn a few, I didn't learn a lot, but I learned something, a couple of things.
One thing that always strikes me is so much of what is recommended, which is true to all ages, is anti-historical. We have nothing to learn. We can learn from everybody and everything except in history. We have nothing to learn from history in terms of worship, theology, everything else. In the Reformation, the Reformed, especially in Lithuania and in Poland, said we have no use for any of the creeds that have come from the ancient church. We are the church of sola scriptura, scripture alone. And of course, within 30 years, they were completely immersed in the Socinianism, the denial of the doctrine of the Trinity, and so on. This happens over and over again. It happens in worship. We have nothing to learn. I've used the example of Willow Creek. Willow Creek began, they said, we have nothing to learn from any model of the Christian church. We're going to begin anew and then build a new model of the Christian church just to see where it takes us. After 20 years, this is true. In 20 years, they decided now that the time has come for us to examine and evaluate the impact of this church. And they did a very honest examination. They said, we have attracted a lot of people and a lot of attention, but we have had negligible influence on the people who come to church at Willow Creek. It doesn't change their lives. It doesn't change their thinking. They come and they go, and they're pretty much the same. And so we've decided we're going to begin again. We're going to forget all about history, what's gone in the past, and we're going to start ground zero and rebuild the model of the church. In other words, having made this tremendous 20-year error, we're going to go and do it again. And this is characteristic of all of these kinds of movements. We don't learn the lessons of history, and in worship and in everything else. We've gone way over time now, but we must have some sense of benzene before we can go any further. Yeah.
Sounds good.
So let's stop and have coffee.